Welcome to The Gut Check, Nutrition and Gut Health for Active People, a podcast where we are talking functional nutrition for functional fitness and a functional you. Remember, if your gut is not functioning optimally, you are not functioning optimally. I am your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, and OCR fan, Kate Klein. You can connect with me on Facebook at The Dublin Dietitian, or go to my website for additional resources, services, and the video recorded versions of these episodes at www.dublindietitian.com. That's DUBLINDIETITIAN. As a standard disclaimer, the information provided here is for educational purposes only. While I strive to provide accurate and helpful information to my listeners and viewers, I cannot take into account individualized circumstances. This is not a substitute for personalized nutrition, health, and medical advice from a health professional. If you are ready to get your personalized plan, you can go to dublindietitian.com and schedule a complimentary strategy session to get a game plan in place for you to hit your health and fitness goals. So let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome to this web exclusive episode of The Gut Check. I do try to normally do the podcast upload every Monday roughly, and you may have heard in some of them, I'll mention that there are visuals or screen shares or pictures within them, but typically I feel like you can still get a lot of value out of those episodes even without any visuals. However, there are some topics that I want to get into where I believe the visual is really, really important and it just won't translate very well into a podcast. So I don't want to miss my normal routine of uploading a Monday podcast, but I also want to be sure that you have access to these resources that I think are important to understanding different lab tests or different results, or maybe meditations eventually, or workout tips, but just different topics that I feel are really important to kind of see a little bit more. So that's what this episode is. I hope you enjoy it. It is not available on the podcast platforms at this time, just here on the website or on YouTube. So check it out, like, subscribe, follow, and make sure you don't miss any of the web exclusives either. So I want to share, I did my GI MAP test, which is a stool test, recently, and I wanted to show what it is, how we use it, what we look for, why it's a really important test. And most people I work with, it's kind of like I almost want to make it mandatory. Like, you're going to do the food sensitivity and you're going to do the GI map, like the end. That's just where we start. If I could do that, I would, because it is so critical. The gut is everything. And you hear me talk about that a lot, but you know, that's where your serotonin is. So if there's depression or anxiety, it could be related to that. It's where IBS resides, that whole tube of the GI. If there's brain fog, if there's arthritis, if there's joint pain, migraines, like all of that we tackle with leaky gut, food sensitivities, inflammation, and the GI map really helps compound that information as well. So I'm gonna kind of slip over to that. Let me screen share this, and we're gonna talk about it. What it is, what we're looking at. Okay, I think you should hopefully be able to see that now. So yeah, so Diagnostic Solutions runs this lab. It's the GI map. And I also want to share why I did this, because to me, this sort of drove home and reiterated the importance of test, don't guess. Because I did it mostly out of curiosity. Like, I don't have symptoms really, that I thought of. Let me rephrase that. We'll talk about where there are things that came up that I found in here, that I just blamed on like getting older and being clumsy. We'll talk about that. But there's a possible reason behind that, oddly enough, clumsiness. Yeah, we'll get to that. But I also figured, even though I'm not symptomatic of anything that I'm aware of, you know, I don't have bloating, indigestion, heartburn, never really have. If anything, we kind of used to joke that I would joke with people like, I have an iron stomach. I can kind of eat anything. And say, hey, do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. But, you know, if it was like, well, we have 2 leftovers for lunch, this one smells a little off, I'll go ahead and eat that one. My immune system, my GI will be fine. You go ahead and have the thing that we know is safe. I'll go ahead and take it. And so that was just kind of my way, because I felt very healthy, very strong. I know I have healthy lifestyle habits in place.
So it's mostly curiosity. You know, I spent 5 years living overseas in Saipan. I did 6 weeks in India to get my yoga teacher training. I've done other international travel. Not that you have to. This stuff can be found at home too. You know, some of these things are very common here, spread very easily, just like sharing a drink with family or friends can do it. If you go eat out and the person serving your food isn't the most hygienic, it's really not that uncommon to have problems. In fact, every client that has run this, there are problems. So I just wanted to kind of see what it was. And I am so glad I did, because this is really an example of prevention 101 at its finest. You don't wait to feel sick. Catch it now, because as I'll kind of show you with this, I have this perfect storm set up for problems down the road. Specifically, probably like arthritis or MS. Probably arthritis would have been the more likely one, systemically, like everywhere. And you know, I don't really want that. So I'm really glad to see this, to be able to catch it before I have issues, before I have any symptoms, and to get my body on track now. You know, once we fall off the cliff of health, it is so hard to get back up. It can be such a bigger fight then. And fortunately, because I have so many good things set in place, I think that's probably why I'm not sensing or feeling or being symptomatic of the bad things, because that doesn't come till later. It's once we kind of slip off the slope and drop, that we start to have problems. So I'm trying to move myself back up to that nice optimal place first. So moving on, GI map, stool test. So it is remarkable to know, like, there are 100 million to 1 trillion microorganisms per gram of fecal content. That is a lot of microbes living in your gut. So most of these microbes are thought to be beneficial, or at least kind of neutral. However, there are some that colonize and they grow out of control, and they can become pathogenic. They can cause diseases and problems. And if you have GI issues, tearing, leaky gut, they can get out of that GI tube and into your body, and that is problematic too. So this is the GI map, gastrointestinal microbial assay plus GI map. So it's a tool that looks at your GI microbiota DNA. It uses a qPCR technology. Maybe you've heard that with all the COVID testing and things like that. But it's meant to be like very, very small amounts are tested very specifically. So it's more accurate, more precise. And this test was designed to detect microbes that may be disturbing your normal, healthy microbial balance. What's contributing to your indicators of digestion, absorption, inflammation, immune system. So I use the GI map stool test because it gets a lot more data than most scopes can. Scopes are a lot more limited in what we can see. DNA, you're not going to see that in a microscope typically. Got some very fancy microscopes. So we can get even smaller. So it's fewer false negatives. We can catch more things in that net. And scopes are only going to look at one area. You've got your colonoscopy that's only looking at the colon, or you've got your endoscopy that's only looking one area, versus stool. It's a collection of things that are moving all the way from your GI. Technically, we can sometimes see some of the things in the mouth too. If the mouth bacteria makes it into the stomach, and your stomach acid's not good, and so it gets through the stomach and gets into the small intestines, large intestines, and colon. So we can sweep and see kind of everything in that whole tube within your body. So it's more comprehensive than scopes as well. The downside with that is if we say, oh, you've got, X bacteria, we don't technically know, is it in your mouth or is it in your GI? But that's, to me, a very small price to pay for everything else we get. Plus, there's no need to do any prep flushing like you have to do before a colonoscopy. It's just you are you, and it is one single stool collection to get all of this data that we'll go through. So first and foremost, we're looking at pathogens. So we've got bacterial pathogens, parasitic pathogens, and viral pathogens. So no one should ever have these bad invaders in the body. And so what you'll see here, all these results below less than DL, that means below detectable limit. And over here we get the range, kind of looking at what we normally would like to see. So fortunately, I don't have any of these, but I've seen them in clients. So E. coli, C. diff, Shigella, Salmonella, even had 2 people that I know of that have had cholera. So you never know. parasites, Cryptosporidium, Giardia, Entamoeba histolytica. This is an important one for some people, and I have had someone with this. This is an interesting one that we'll often see with people who have sort of like mysterious health issues. They're maybe in pain, maybe they can't stop vomiting. They'll say like, my brain feels terrible, and nobody can really figure out what's wrong with them. So doctors are kind of clueless. So a handful of times we'll see it's this histolytica in them. So that's, for lack of a better word, cool that we can test it and see and rule that out. Norovirus, that sort of thing. So fortunately, none of that. So where I have one of my first issues, H. pylori. This is actually very common, and it is pretty darn high, almost twice as high as what we'd like. So well above the normal range. Now, it's estimated that like 50% of people have this. It's actually very, very common. And it's very, very easily spread. So if there's something you feel like is a household, I've had people sometimes say like, oh, well, like this is just my family. We all have this. It must be genetic. Maybe, or maybe your parents have it. And then as you grew up, they passed it to you by sharing food, kissing kids' cheeks can get there. Like it's very, very transmissible. Very, very common for that. And then what this does, H. pylori, one of the biggest problems with it is it reduces your stomach acid. It makes it not strong enough. So again, if we kind of think of the GI as this tube of defense, it is the internal equivalent to your skin. It protects us, it separates us from the outside world. And the stomach is supposed to kill things. It's supposed to be acidic enough to not just break down food, but to kill off too much bacteria or other pathogens from getting through. So if that stomach acid's not strong enough, we have weakened the front gates. We're like opening the drawbridge to things to get into the deeper GI and cause problems. So that stomach acid is really, really important. Now, some people, they can have H. pylori, but at a smaller number, and if they're not symptomatic and it's not too high, we don't worry about it too much. Usually we want to deal with people who are symptomatic or very high. And just to kind of explain this, if you think back to some math classes, 102 maybe, E means like times 10, kind of all the zeros. So this would be like 2, 2, and 3 zeros at the end. So that's what that E is. It's just kind of a shorthand to make that number a little more manageable. So normally people chronically infected with H. pylori, they're going to have what's called pangastritis. There's like inflammation of the entire stomach wall. Most people are familiar with H. pylori causing stomach ulcers, and that can be it, but there's a lot of other things H. pylori can do. Again, that big one being that it reduces hydrochloric acid production, which then in turn allows other pathogens to make it past the stomach, which normally should be fairly acidic, and that can cause an overgrowth of bad or even good bacteria. So we'll talk more, but good bacteria needs to be the right amounts in the right places in the right ratios, even if it's good. So that's kind of what we're looking at with the H. pylori. This is sort of one of the first things. If there are problems, treat this and it can help balance a lot of the other issues. So a lot of people will have abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, chronic GI issues, ulcers, and potentially cancer. About 2% of these different virulence factors could lead to cancer if not treated. Unfortunately, again, I don't have any of those, so that's not too big an issue. But the other things H. pylori can do is it can induce mucosal atrophy, or kind of breaking down of the mucosal lining, and that then changes the intestinal tissues. It kind of breaks the mesh of your stomach lining, tears it up. We'll talk about zonulin, that's another marker. And that can now, again, get things going beyond that protective tube and into your body. And that is where we can see triggers for autoimmune issues such as arthritis, Hashimoto's, kind of depending. This is a big indicator that your defense is weak. And when your defense is weak, depending what other strains we see, what other things are going on, what you might be setting yourself up for. So top issue to focus on. It often exacerbates these other lab results. Conventional medicines typically going to prescribe an antibiotic as treatment or an antiviral. But because those come with a whole host of other gut disruptive side effects, I'm personally going to do, it's an intensive protocol because it's longer. That's kind of the trade-off. Antibiotics, you know, medical pills can usually do 10 to 14 days. This is going to be like a 60-day protocol, but I feel better about it. I feel like I'm tailoring it. And in addition to just dealing with the H. pylori, I'm going to get to deal with the other things going on as well. And I'll go over the supplements in another video. But essentially it's kind of a combo. You have to, first of all, break the force field that H. pylori likes to hide behind. It's called the biofilm layer. Then you've got to have something else that actually kills the H. pylori, you know, strong herbals. And then I blend it with soothing agents to kind of help calm everything down, because as you're dumping dead bugs into the body and killing it off, that's a stress in the body. So things to help reduce that inflammation and start to rebuild. So things like aloe and glutamine, bone broths, collagen, all that stuff. So once that's resolved, it's always good. Again, it can be from the mouth to the colon. So think about your dental health as well. That can be a reservoir for H. pylori and other things. So again, fortunately, like no issues. I don't have cavities. Last time I went to the dentist, he was actually kind of blown away with my oral health, especially since I'd gone 5 years in Saipan without a formal tooth cleaning. So yeah, everything seems pretty good there. Let's see. So moving on, then we have the normal bacterial flora. So again, your intestines are made up of this complex ecosystem, trillions of microorganisms. Technically, we have more non-human cells in us than we do human cells. They're just so much smaller that we kind of are what we are. But yeah, our ecosystem, that tube is massive, that garden, as I've heard it called. So the right balance, again, plays an important role in this good bacteria, because they help extract nutrients from our diet so we get better nutrition. They maintain that healthy gut barrier function, that good defense, that drawbridge. They'll produce things like vitamin K and biotin for us. They protect against bad bacteria getting in and colonizing or possibly translocating if our gut's torn up. So again, we need normal bacteria flora in that sweet spot for a healthy range, not too little, not too much, in the right ratios. So again, most of mine are in a good range technically, but if you kind of look at these E11, I'm hitting on the higher ends of these for some of them. E6 to E8, not too bad, but the 777, you know, 877. So I'm pushing it on a lot of these. But what that means, that's just sort of a puzzle piece that says, you know, there's a lot getting in that's probably, again, showing that stomach acid is an issue. So again, H. pylori will help do that, kind of help resolve that. So I don't worry about it too much. Like, yes, they can cause problems being too high. It can kind of add to that maldigestive issues, potentially some inflammation. You know, some of these specifically like Escherichia, it's common to see those with UTIs, but again, I've never had one. But again, probably thanks to the fact that I do have other really good, strong bacteria. And when we get to the digestive area, I also have some pretty decent numbers there. So this all makes me lead to the thought that the H. pylori is fairly new, probably something I picked up in the last year or two, because a lot of other things haven't atrophied away. So this is good, catching it early. So the other reason this is good, and I have had people who are like below detectable limits for some of these good bacteria as well. And so with each of them, there's certain foods that they like to eat. So it's better to, you know, we shift the diet. Maybe they need some more red polyphenols, maybe they need more fiber. And then we can actually tailor a probiotic to them based on what they need and what they need to kill off. So again, it is best to personalize beyond just a generic probiotic when possible. Test, don't guess. Find out what you need, what's right for you. Let's personalize it. Akkermansia is a little high. So again, not super high, and really dealing with H. pylori will probably help this. So I'm not super worried about it, but if I didn't treat it, this is one that has been linked to multiple sclerosis. If this bacteria gets too high for too long and gets through the GI, and you've got like genetic predisposition, and you've got the leaky gut and the zonulin, like you could be setting yourself up. And so phyla microbiota, basically, if you think of kind of taking these guys and putting them under two umbrellas, they belong to either of these little families or phyla. And these kind of dominate the entire digestive tract from, again, mouth and nose, throat, all the way to the colon. So we need things in the proper ratio. Your Firmicutes versus Bacteroidetes. And I usually just call it the F to B ratio, a little easier to deal with. So when we see abnormal results in one or both of these, it suggests, again, just an imbalance in that good normal bacteria. So both of mine are pretty high, again, because these are all edging onto the high end of the ranges, if not over. So again, it's mostly just indicating that I've got the good stuff going, but there's not enough stomach acid to kind of just keep everything in check. But the ratio is good. We want the ratio of F to B below 1. Now, this is kind of cool. This is something I've seen a few times. What that means, if it's flipped the other way, like you have too much F, not enough B, if you have this high ratio, it actually suggests that the microbial imbalance could be related. It's stronger in the bacteria that take calories from food to give to you. So essentially, and I believe Andy and I talked about this in the episode about weight loss, when calories in, calories out doesn't work. One of the things is the type of bacteria. There are some bacteria that actually pull more calories into your body. They extract more from the food. So these people can have more difficulty losing weight, even if like thyroid looks good and everything else looks good. They have more fat deposits going on, and it can perpetuate this process in the body called lipogenesis, or making new fat. We see impaired insulin sensitivity, so sometimes related like PCOS and hormones. And when we have impaired insulin sensitivity, that also makes it harder to lose weight, and then also increased inflammation. So even good bacteria, and it could technically even be in the right amounts individually on these upper ones here, the normal things. But if you have the wrong ratio of good bacteria, that can cause you to have more insulin sensitivity and struggle to lose weight. So again, if you've kind of ruled out some of those other things, this might be something to check. If you swear you're eating, not under eating, watch that video. If you've got weight issues that you're feeling very frustrated by, check that out. It's a very good video where we talk about all kinds of things that can be user errors to weight loss. But when you're literally doing everything right and it's still not happening, all kinds of different things that could be blocking it. So calories in, calories out does not always work for everybody. So box done. Moving on, opportunistic bacteria. You don't want any of these. These bacteria only cause disease and illness in some individuals, fortunately, but we don't want them. There's no benefit to these guys. It's sometimes okay to have them. Like, again, if your body's pretty strong and they're there, hopefully you'll kind of flush them out and not be too problematic. But if you're immune compromised, this can be a problem. So a lot of individuals will actually come into contact with these and not experience any symptoms. But if you are vulnerable, it can cause inflammation, gastroenteritis, loose stool, diarrhea, abdominal pain, constipation, like generic IBS stuff. So overgrowth and excessive colonization can occur when the good bacteria are impaired. If we don't have enough of those good soldiers. So first you got the drawbridge, it's come through your stomach. Now we need the good soldiers in there. But if we don't have enough of the good guys, maybe that's due to poor diet, too much antibiotic use, too many rounds of antibiotics, a parasitic infection, stress in your body, a weakened immune system, then we don't have enough good soldiers and these bad guys can take over. Again, often seen with H. pylori because that stomach acid's too low. And again, the problem here, you see, there's none. We've got a handful of below detectable limits, but I got a handful of things in there. And again, when that leaky gut or intestinal permeability or that high zonulin level is there, these guys can migrate out of the GI tube and into your body, into your joints, into your brain, into your lungs, into whatever organ. So that's called translocation. And spoiler, my zonulin level's not low. We'll get to that. So again, I'm glad to be seeing this. So yeah, I do have a couple. And again, a lot can be related. Bacillus, often related to either SIBO, which I hope I don't have. I don't think I have, but who knows? I'm asymptomatic. But again, more commonly and probably it's related to that reduced digestive function due to the low stomach acid. Enterococcus, not too bad, not great, but also connected to stomach acid, and so on. So there's different things. Morganella can be in there. That one we see, it's a major histamine producer. So we've got that. What else? You know, some of these just produce toxins that can damage cells. Some will cause abdominal cramping. Some cause loose stool. So that's just kind of over and over what a lot of them do. Some of them are more common. We'll see a pattern of these if there is SIBO. This test doesn't officially confirm if someone has SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but it can give us some clues that go, you know, these are associated with it. If you deal with the GI map and there's still an issue, let's go ahead and get SIBO checked as well. But again, so most of these should improve with the H. pylori protocol. So yeah, overall, that should bring it all. And then potential autoimmune triggers. So these are ones that, again, these up here are associated more with like loose stool, maybe damaging cells. And these are ones that tend to be connected directly to autoimmune diseases that we see later. So again, got to address it, got to deal with it, got to fix the leaky gut and that high zonulin level. So certain opportunistic bacteria can initiate things like autoimmune thyroiditis or Hashimoto's or inflammatory arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, all these different things. So they can trigger the autoimmune process essentially. And again, it's more likely, so if you have the bacteria, you see I've got a handful, and you've got the high zonulin, which I'll talk about more, but I've got it. Maybe not as bad now as when I did this test. I'll talk about that. And then if you add in some family history, and there is a little bit of family history for arthritic conditions in my family. So I'm glad I'm doing this. Let's see if there's anything. Citrobacter below. Klebsiella, not awesome. Don't want to see that. That one can be associated with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, or other arthritis associated with that. Psoriatic arthritis. Psoriatic arthritis. It's also been linked to irritable bowel disease. So kind of all in that family again. If you're like me, you're realizing there's some patterns about what I'm talking about. Prevotella also connected to RA, but also seen as an elevated number when that digestive capacity is lower. Fuso, I actually see a lot of people. It kind of lives in the mouth and the upper GI. So keep good oral health, good bacteria. So overall, it does indicate some borderline autoimmune issues there for me. And these should improve by decreasing the H. pylori and improving the stomach acid. So that's kind of the first step to help address all of this. Fungus, yeast, thankfully none of this, but this is really common too. These organisms are common in the digestive tract, but if it gets into that overgrowth, then it can cause illness in people who are susceptible, or if it gets too much. Now, fungal growth can be localized in the body. So for example, if you have candida, it might be high in the large intestine, but normal in the small intestine, or vice versa. Like, again, we don't necessarily know where it is, but it's good to know if it's there. If you have a lot of like yeast infections, if you find you don't respond well to like high intake of sugar or starches, or fungal kind of foods like bread, certain cheeses, beer, maybe mushrooms. It might indicate kind of a fungal or yeast issue, or maybe even a mold issue in your house. You know, gas, bloating, constipation, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea are the symptoms, but again, those are so generic, that's not really helpful. But some of the unique things we'll see with fungal or yeast dysbiosis is eczema, which could also be food sensitivities and gluten, athlete's foot, yeast infections, thrush, jock itch, people with like toenail fungal, like that sort of thing. Like those are pretty indicative that there's probably an overgrowth within your body and it is now manifesting outwardly. So good to check that and treat it. No viruses, which is good. Epstein-Barr is a very interesting virus. So it's mono. It's what causes mono in most people, kids. So if you think of chickenpox, if you're aware of this connection, we get chickenpox at a young age, most of us. And that virus, the herpes zoster virus, now goes dormant in the body for some people. And it waits until something triggers it, usually high amounts of stress, because stress and inflammation are at the root of most issues. And it comes back as shingles. So if you've ever had shingles, it's usually because you had chickenpox, that virus kind of went dormant and it's now remanifesting. So EBV is similar. You had mono, in some people it goes dormant and it can manifest later as some kind of problem. It sort of seems like this weird mystery illness causing a lot of different problems in people, pain, brain fog issues. So it's another kind of one of those, if we don't know what else is going on, maybe let's check that. But fortunately, none of that for me, even though I had mono as a kid, so my body got rid of it. Yay. And here's the other awful thing I wasn't expecting, that I'll have a story. I'll have a story about what my theory is here. So protozoa, these are additional types of parasites. Blasto is actually fairly common. The mainstream media often ignores it, but in the functional medicine world, we see a real tight connection between blasto and IBS. So if we've kind of ruled out other things through food sensitivities and addressing lifestyle, and there's still problems, that's a common guy. But again, generic symptoms, diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, fever, fatigue. Sometimes it can lead to the joint pain and the arthritis and brain fog and skin manifestations. So sometimes that it is a little tricky to take care of and eradicate, but it's possible. All right, time to talk about mine here. Indolamax nana, or E. nana. So it's pretty high. It's considered non-pathogenic in most people, and some people are very asymptomatic. But and there's very little research about it. I was trying to find it. There's not too much research done, not recently. I actually spoke with a doctor who again runs these GI labs like day in, day out to verify things. But what this one is possibly and probably does is it affects collagen related tissues. So we see muscle pain and stiffness, joint issues. Seeing the way she described it, she's like, oh, we see this in people who like they perpetually seem to injure themselves while they're working out. Like they have this bad knee, then they do this and all of a sudden their back hurts. Maybe the shoulder's going. You know, it sometimes gets confused with like Lyme disease or other things, but if magnesium, your workout form, like everything else is good, think E. nana, think this guy. And that was when like a little light bulb went on for me, because I was doing my OCR like marathon set of races in the summer of 2019. And well, let's talk about where this comes from first. So, story time, fellows and friends. This one can come from other people, but it is common in livestock. And my suspicion, I had H. pylori first, started to kind of weaken my system. There were several races that I did, several OCRs that used pig manure to mix with the mud to help create more. This is not a super uncommon thing. There were definitely two that stick out in my mind, and I'm not going to name names because I still love my OCRs, but there were definitely two that I recall smelling the pig shit. And even one of the like the volunteers kind of checking at the different obstacles, she's like, oh yeah, we just, you know, we partnered with some of the farmers in the area and they provided this so that we could, you know, have more slop for you guys. And I was like, oh, that's disgusting, cool. And after this race, I had this horrendous rash. It was just this absolutely miserable. It started like on my butt and my hips. I'll share pictures later. Just this red, like torch claw looking thing. And over time it came up onto my chest, was going up my neck. Nothing OTC, over the counter, was working. I was doing like oatmeal baths and Aveeno creams and lotions and homemade things. Finally went to like an urgent cares, like this is brutal and it's not getting better. And she gave me like prescription level creams, prescription medications, and it did not respond to anything. And I had assumed that I just got like poison sumac or poison oak or something. And my whole family, we were on a family trip to Scotland and we're all like looking at pictures like, what is this? What do you have? Not that it mattered because you can't really do anything but wait it out. But it kind of clicked. Like that's also a sign of getting a parasite. You get this rash first. And then that's kind of one of the symptoms, the onset. And that was probably about the same time well, we're going to get personal, like I'm not already, but that was around the same time my stool did shift a little. But I also figured it's because it was the end of the season, getting into winter, I wasn't working out as much, because I do notice a difference when I work out versus when I'm going through like a massive sedentary period. That happened over the winter of the pandemic too. But some other things that happened. So in those races, I hurt my shoulder. I fell off one too many monkey bars. And I think just doing that so many times, it kind of strained that shoulder. But then there were some other things that started happening. The left shoulder started to bother me. And I remember I was just sitting, like watching TV, hadn't done a workout that morning, nothing. I was just sitting, and all of a sudden, like the same sensation I can tell when this one kind of falls out of socket a little bit when it was first injured, and I had to kind of rehab it and rehab the rotator cuff muscles. I just felt that here. I was like, oh, like it just fell out of socket. Like I need that pop back in, and I couldn't figure out why. And that was just a problem. And then over the winter, I went snowboarding and I fell and I landed incorrectly. Instead of like slamming, I palmed like that, and it messed up my wrist, which isn't abnormal. It's actually very, very common, but it was not a heavy fall, and it took a really long time to heal. And then I went trail running earlier this year, and I'm running and I rolled my ankle. And again, like that's not uncommon for people, but for me, that's very, very rare. For me, I'm usually very in tune with my body, very well balanced when I run. As much as I'm clumsy when I'm not paying attention, I am the person who will walk into doors. When I run, I am zeroed in, and I've almost never rolled an ankle while running or walking, and I'm like focused. And again, that took a little while to heal, longer than I expected. So again, these were things I'm like, man, I was getting older. I have to admit my age at some point. But it's just kind of enough to make me go, you know, maybe that. And if that's the issue I've had with just less than 2 years of that little guy in my body, I definitely don't want it to get worse. Again, we're going to see the leaky gut in a minute. You can actually see it at the bottom of the screen there, that red zonulin. If that gets out of the GI and into my body even more than maybe it already has, that can lead to additional problems. So that is my story about my guess as to where my little E-Nana came from. But yeah, so that's very important to be tackling. Worms, fortunately, none of those. So the other thing that I like about the GI map now is because in addition to just the microbiome, it's giving us some indicators of how your digestive health, your intestinal health is. So steatocrit, excuse me, means if there is fat in your stool. And if there's fat in your stool, that means you're not breaking things down, you're not absorbing, and you're probably not able to fully absorb your fat-soluble vitamins either. So A, D, E, and K need fat. And if it's flushing out of your system and down the toilet, it's not getting into your body. So it could be as simple as like you're not chewing well enough, or you're a little bit too stressed and running. But it can also be low digestive enzymes, low stomach acid, or some gallbladder issues. So mine's present, which isn't ideal, not entirely unfounded with H. pylori, but this marker indicates your elastase kind of looks at your digestive enzymes, and 2 to 400 is still not ideal. We like it, I'm sorry, 2 to 500. I like it 500 or better, so technically it's over 500. So my digestive enzymes are probably pretty decent. But which means if there's stool, but I'm sitting and I'm chewing well and my digestive enzymes are there, it means maybe my gallbladder's just kind of not ideal, maybe a little bit sluggish or a little bit thick. So that can be with estrogen issues, some thyroid issues. So things to help with that are drinking lemon water. I know I've talked in a lot of my challenges about people drinking lemon water in the morning, or bitter greens. You know, back in the day, people went to the store and they bought bitters before a meal. We don't do that now. We don't tend to be those who enjoy bitter tastes too much, but bitter greens can help kind of stimulate bile flow and a healthy bile. So that can even be vegetables like arugula, frisee, dandelion leaves, or we can supplement if needed. My numbers aren't so high that I'm worried about that. So I just started doing more of the greens, the bitter greens. GR markers, so these are cool too. This one is cool. So, I mean, I think they're all cool. This is my job. B-gluc, basically, when we see high levels of fecal B-gluc, this can indicate sort of unfavorable metabolic changes in the colon. So it could just be dysbiosis or like a bad bacterial balance, but it often shows that there's some interference with phase 2 detoxification in the liver and therefore sweeping through the colon. A lot of times it's related to hormone issues. So not that the hormone issues are causing the B-gluc problem, but that the B-gluc problem is causing hormone issues. So the body is not processing out usually estrogen specifically optimally, meaning your body's going to backlog on estrogen and estrogen byproducts, and that can affect your whole sex hormone balance. Testosterone, estrogen, PCOS, thyroid issues, PMS cycles. So fortunately, my number's not too bad there. I'm not worried about that one. It's fine. And again, probably shift a little bit with H. pylori. Occult blood, so no blood in my stool, that's good. That's one that we see sometimes with hemorrhoids, but that's also where we go, okay, you've got irritable bowel disease, possibly, instead of just like irritable bowel syndrome. They are different. Immune response, so again, things are looking pretty strong here. Secretory IgA, we want it around 1,000 or higher, so a little bit low, not too bad. But what that is, it's an antibody protein, so protective protein secreted into your GI to help protect against bad bacteria. So again, my numbers aren't bad, and that might be part of why, assuming the E. nana and H. pylori are relatively newer manifestations, I haven't been feeling too many symptoms. It's kind of a good indicator of immune strength of your GI. Now, when we do see it low, that means we've got a suppressed gut immune system and or chronic stress because stress really burns through your SIG-A and many things I've talked about. B vitamins, C vitamins, magnesium, serotonin, stress burns through all those, but it also eats up your SIG-A, your secretory IgA. So we do see it with chronic dysbiosis, sometimes antigen exposure, immunocompromisation, protein malnutrition, which happens especially if you have low stomach acid. So it is an immune protein. But again, it's likely gonna increase even more once with the H. pylori treatment. And just kind of continue managing stress. And then anti-gliadin, IgA, borderline high, anything above 100 indicates a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So even though I don't have celiac disease, this is indicating gluten has entered my body and my body is not happy. So gliadin or gliadin, I've heard it pronounced both ways, it's a component of the gluten protein. So levels indicate the amount, the extent, the severity of an immune response your body has to gluten. But those antibodies can last for 3 to 6 months. So really it indicates if you were exposed to gluten within the last 6 months and if you're having a reaction to it. So I did my sample, I want to say it was in March, if not, yeah, I think it was mid-March, maybe early March, which really means that anything from the last 6 months, which means Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. So I knew I was having a lot more junk food, a lot more treat food, a lot more eating out. It was kind of like winter depression, struggling to work out because I still wasn't back at the gym, which then made my food kind of go off. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm surprised by how strong the reaction was, but I do know that I had gluten and I had copious amounts of it. But gluten adds to that zonulin number you see here. So gluten is one of the things that increases zonulin, and that's an indicator of how damaged your GI lining is. So what that tells me is that I do need to keep my gluten moderated and minimized, especially while going through this H. pylori protocol. Now, where this test is also beneficial are for people who swear they're gluten-free and they need to be or are trying to be, but they're not feeling better. So for some people, if you're super, super sensitive, even a little cross-contamination of gluten can be detrimental. So for example, I had there was one young man who had celiac disease, official, and he was so sensitive that even going out to a restaurant with his girlfriend pre-pandemic and getting a bunless burger, because the burger was grilled on the same surface that that restaurant grilled the buns, that was enough cross-contamination to make him sick for 3 days. So where this test, this anti-gliadin test, can be helpful are for people who need to be gluten-free, are trying to be gluten-free, don't feel better and want to know why. We can actually test, like, are you getting cross-contamination? Are you truly gluten-free? Because again, it can last in your body for 6 months. So I normally have my clients just do like a 30 to 60 day trial without gluten, maybe 90. If we get this test back, if it's part of their program and we see a high number, I do encourage them to refrain longer, to continue healing first. But even for people who swear they're gluten-free, this is an important test because it means you're still getting cross-contamination somewhere, whether that's, you know, a shared surface. Maybe you use a butter knife after someone spread butter on their bread. That can be cross-contamination. Maybe it's in a medication, in a cosmetic. Had one person who was in the dog food that she fed her dog, and even just that little bit, she'd use her hands to just scoop and then go wash. But even that could be enough to trigger an immune response. So when you need to be really particular, that's a good data point to monitor. Really making sure that no cross reaction or hidden sources are happening with that. So yeah, I'm not going to be that picky, but I will be pretty picky, and I'll just reduce my gluten again because I know I shouldn't. Calprotectin. So one of the most studied markers of GI inflammation, so it's good to have there. So if that number's high, which mine is not, thankfully, it indicates that a certain type of white blood cell has infiltrated the gut mucosa. And so this is sort of the gold standard to, again, help, in addition to the occult blood, to look at the difference between irritable bowel disease versus irritable bowel syndrome, so that we can monitor and treat differently. So that's what that can go up from. It also goes up from like diverticulitis, food allergies, toxins, certain drugs like NSAIDs will elevate that. But again, fortunately for me, not too bad at all. And then zonulin, it is high for me. I'm at 150, we want it below 107. So zonulin is a protein that, again, opens those intercellular tight junctions, is what they're called. So your cell wall should be cell, 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 all nice and tight, nice tight mesh, nothing getting through. But you know, when things start to damage it, stress, certain medications, gluten, junk food, whatever it is, any sort of stress in the body, physical, mental, chemical, emotional, nutritional, but gluten is notorious for it, as is something called LPS. I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, zonulin indicates and perpetuates this widening, this permeability of the intestines, so that, again, that should be that defensive tube that helps keep the outside world and our inside microbiome separate from our cells, our organs, our blood. And mine is high, so I, again, have these potential autoimmune triggers that are elevated. They have the ability to cross the GI defense, get into my blood, get into my joints, my shoulders, my muscles, all of that. So LPS is another thing. Basically, it's a byproduct as you start killing off bacteria or pathogens. It's kind of a die-off. So sometimes when people do like a detox or something, or go through a big protocol, there's that die-off stage, and that's what that is. It's high LPS numbers. And that can elevate zonulin too. So this is why when I work with people on their GI map, sometimes if I see something like a parasite or a worm, sometimes even H. pylori, depending where we're coming from with them, I don't necessarily attack that right away, because if their zonulin is high, if their stress is high, and now you're dumping like a die-off on top of that, that can be a lot on the body. They can actually feel worse before they feel better. So for some people, it's like, okay, we do want to attack that, don't get me wrong, but let's prepare your body for that battle first. Let's focus on just like removing gluten, removing the junk food, you know, get the diet cleaned up, make sure you're getting enough sleep, enough water. What are you doing to manage your cortisol? Because cortisol tears your gut too. Again, that's just the kind of stress. So we sometimes, in some cases, will take 2 to 3 months before we even start addressing these numbers to just focus on preparing the foundation. You have to build your house first. You have to build your fortress first before you can handle an incoming attack, an incoming die-off on it. But anyway, so yes, that is the process. That is what the GI map shows. So for me, overall, it is showing that my guess is I've got kind of the torn up gut, probably from stress and probably from the things that are in there. Vicious cycle, everything's a cycle. So I'm going to be going through a 60-day H. pylori protocol, and that will then be followed up by probably about a 30-day anti-protozoa protocol. But we got to get the H. pylori first. I already have taken gluten back out of my diet again. That kind of came out a while ago with few exceptions here and there, you know, the occasional pizza or beer. But for the most part, I'm not a big gluten eater. I always focus on my sleep. I'm very protective of it. So doing all the lifestyle habits, getting those all in place. After I get my second dose of the vaccine, I'm going to let my body heal from that, because that's another stress and another inflammatory response. So heal up from that, then start in on the protocol. I will keep you guys posted along the way, because it's a question I get a lot. Like, what do you do if? What do you do if? So I'll just show you what I'm doing, how it's working, how it's going. Share the supplements I use, what it's going to look like. It is what it is. And we'll go from there. So there's a very personal internal look at yours truly. You know, welcome in. We get personal. But I hope that kind of shows what the GI map is, what the test looks at, why that's important, why it's all related. And why I do truly believe that it's best to test, don't guess. And I think it's good to do tests as well, just for the preventative factor, because what I showed you with all that, hopefully kind of, if you didn't get the takeaway, then I totally misfired. But I have kind of a perfect storm brewing in my body right now to develop pain, autoimmune, possibly arthritis later down the road. So I am very glad to tackle that now while I have the energy, while I don't have the pain. You know, before I've fully fallen off the cliff, maybe I'm sliding, but I can get back up to an optimal place from that. And I know some people might be like, oh, you're just a hypochondriac. Who wants to see all the things that are bad with them? If they don't feel good, just feel good. But you're not going to feel good later, and it's going to be harder later. So yes, maybe you feel great and you can get the test and you are great, and that's awesome. But I personally, I'm a data junkie. I like to know, I want to feel as good as I can, which is kind of what I expected to see. It's like, oh, maybe just shift your food a little like this. So I'm grateful to learn this, and I am grateful to be able to share it with people, and hopefully it helps empower you to understand what's going on. Hopefully you understand the critical role of gut health in all things. And that there's always things we can do, and there's always science growing and learning and progressing. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody if they have additional questions about the GI map. If you are ready to get your own test, the shipment goes right to you. The kit gets sent to you. You do your collection there, and you just take it to a FedEx drop-off. So it's easy. I'll do a video on how to collect later. I know that's kind of gross. I won't actually show you, but I'll talk through it. But it is what it is. So if you are interested in the GI map, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Let me know what other labs you might be interested in seeing. Let me know what other questions you have. And I hope you make it a great day. Strive to thrive, guys. Take care.